Films in Focus with David Sterritt is underwritten by The Movie House, your destination for first-run Hollywood and independent movies, and a digital portal to the Met Opera, National Theatre Live, and special events worldwide in Millerton, New York, and on the web, themoviehouse.net.
David Sterritt is the editor-in-chief of the Quarterly Review of Film and Video, contributing writer at Cineast, film professor at the Maryland Institute College of Art, Robin Hood Radio's very own critic. He joins us weekly. The films The Hate You Give, A Bread Factory, Can You Ever Forgive Me? That's too much fun. We could just end the show here. Hi, David.
Well, we have to find out if I'm going to forgive you or not.
I understand.
Think that over, right?
We need a cliffhanger.
Yeah, well, anyway, we have three films which are pretty different from each other today, but they're all out and about, and I think worth talking about. The first one I want to talk about is The Hate You Give, which is directed by George Tillman Jr., who is a very talented African-American filmmaker. And this is very much part of this recent wave of the films with African-American subjects and filmmakers. And this is really, I think, one of the best of the bunch, perhaps the best of the bunch, except for Spike Lee's movie Black Klansman, which is really excellent. This is based on a young adult novel, and it all starts off, the movie starts off, like a, rather a young adult story. We have our main character, who is a teenager named Star, and she is Star Carter, and she and her two brothers and their family are the subjects of it, and we kind of get to know them all. And then as time goes by, we find out she has a boyfriend, a white boyfriend, and their relationship is a little bit rocky, but it's not too bad. And most of all, we find out that she lives a kind of a divided existence in a certain way. Even though her parents, are good, solid working people, they live in a pretty downscale neighborhood. But her parents, especially her mother, are absolutely determined that the kids are going to have whatever advantages life can give them. And so they have her and her brothers going to a prep school, which is mostly white. And there she gets along very well with everybody, but she's very aware of being sort of the Star version 1 in her neighborhood and Star version 2 when she's off at her school among the mostly white students there. And again, she has a white boyfriend, and their relationship is not going totally smoothly at the moment. And so this is all very sort of young adult kind of subject matter that we're into. And then the movie takes a real turn, and this is very early in the film, so this is not a spoiler, when she is out with her boyfriend, with another boy who's been a very close friend of hers since they were babies practically, and they have a run-in with a white police officer, and this boy who she is with gets shot and killed, and she is a witness to this. And we then have the story take a very different and much darker turn. But the film continues. It's a fairly long movie. The film continues to be divided between these sort of two different aspects. There is one, what we might call the private life of Star, her dealing with her family and with her friends at school and so forth, and above all, coming to terms with her blackness and finding out that her white best girlfriend at the school where she goes to has a kind of unconscious racism going on that wasn't really apparent before Star got involved with all this business about the police shooting and so forth. And then we have her dealing with the aftermath of this shooting, which is not so much an aftermath because the issues very much continue for her. There's a big question as to whether she is going to be involved in court proceedings, disciplinary proceedings against the police officer, and that becomes a very major thread of the movie. But again, the movie very, very nicely balances these two different sides of its own story. The screenplay was written by Audrey Wells, based on this novel by Angie Thomas, dealing very, very sensitively and sometimes amusingly with Star and her experiences at school and her feelings about being black in a mostly white environment, and then dealing with this very, very harrowing episode with the police shooting, which eventually becomes a great big neighborhood and even city issue, and she is really in the middle of that. So again, the movie kind of goes back and forth between these two different threads, but they're integrated with each other and very nicely handled. Very, very fine performances. I'll especially mention Amanda Sternberg as Star, and the wonderful Regina Hall, who is so excellent as her mother, Lisa Carter. So very, very good movie, very, very worth seeing, raises some issues which are very fraught in today's contemporary America, but at the same time, it's just a very engaging movie, and I was really pretty much consistently riveted by it all the way through. Very, very watchable movie, despite its somewhat overly long length. Speaking of overly long length, let's turn to our second film for today, which is called A Bread Factory. A Bread Factory is a really long movie. In fact, it's two movies. There's part one and there's part two. And each part is about 2 hours long, so the whole thing is about 4 hours long. And you could watch them, I suppose, separately. I suppose you could watch part two without watching part one. But they are really meant to be seen one after the other in order, and I think that's certainly the way I saw them, and that is surely the way that they will make the most sense. And this is a movie which is written and directed by a very independent filmmaker named Patrick Wang, shot in upstate New York. And the title refers to an arts center, which is called the Bread Factory. And they have been in business for decades. They've been in business for about 40 years. But now another arts center is being set up in this community, this upstate community, this small community called Checkford. It's a fictional place. And suddenly the people who run the Bread Factory are not sure if they're going to be able to keep surviving. This other new arts center, which is being set up with a whole lot more funding, is being driven by some performance artists who are known as May and Ray, or just May Ray, who are Chinese performance artists. And they are very involved in kind of very avant-garde, up-to-the-minute, post-modernistic kind of stuff. And we have little samples of that during the movie at various points. It turns out they're not from China at all. They're from, one of them is from Australia, and the other one is from Louisiana. But their persona, and they're artists, so they're totally entitled to have whatever persona they want, is that they are Chinese. And what they definitely are, again, is very sort of postmodern and advanced in their art. Whereas the stuff that the Bread Factory does is much more traditional, and in fact, fairly large parts of the two-part movie, A Bread Factory, are devoted to rehearsals and/or performances of Hecuba by Euripides, so an ancient Greek tragedy, and then there's some Chekhov thrown in there too. So we have the Bread Factory doing their own interpretations. They have, in fact, a brand new translation of the Euripides play, their own interpretations of ancient Greek and sort of classic modern drama, Chekhov, whereas May and Ray are doing their sort of zany postmodern performance art. And so we have the tensions between these two things. By all means, the whole focus of the movie is on the Bread Factory and on their very traditional work and on their effort to survive, bringing art and culture to a small community that really needs it. And again, they've been doing this for like decades, and they just want to continue doing it, but the kinds of pressures that are on them, financial pressures, and just the pressures of keeping attention on this sort of extremely worthwhile activity are very much there and are very much a focus of the movie, especially the two older women named Greta and Dorothea, who run the Bread Factory. And by the way, Dorothea I want to mention particularly because she's played by Tyne Daly, who's been around for about 1,000 years herself, and who does a very, very nice job in this movie. So that's what A Bread Factory is about, and there are some people who find this movie absolutely just so charming they can't get over it. I found it not particularly original, and I didn't feel it had a whole lot of narrative thrust to it. There are parts when it breaks off into kind of unusual touches of its own. There are parts of it, especially in part two, that break off into being sort of a musical, and we suddenly have musical numbers, sort of song and dance type stuff. And these kinds of things lend some spark to the movie from time to time. And the whole movie is very, very well intentioned and very nicely realized on what was obviously a limited budget. Again, Patrick Wang is a very independent filmmaker and does things very much on his own terms. And I respect that all the way, and I respect the movie. I just can't say that I found it really all that emotionally involving all the way through. My attention would sort of wander away and then come back to it. So I support it 100%, and I hope a lot of people go to see it. I just have to say that I don't regard it as one of the very finest independent movies of the year. Moving on now to a bigger movie with a much higher kind of public profile. We have Can You Ever Forgive Me, which is directed by Mariel Heller from a screenplay co-written by Nicole Holofcener and Jeff Whitty. And I mention all those names because this was originally going to be a movie directed by Nicole Holofcener herself, who is a very talented director. But it was going to have Julianne Moore in it, and shortly before the movie was about to go before the cameras, Julianne Moore had creative differences with the director, Nicole Holofcener, and walked off the project, and the producers started the whole thing over again with a new director, namely Mariel Heller. But she does a very, very fine job, and it turned into a Melissa McCarthy movie. And so that is really what this film is being thought of as now, is a Melissa McCarthy movie. And it is very much a Melissa McCarthy movie, and it's a Melissa McCarthy we haven't really seen before because it's a serious dramatic role that she essays here, not her usual sort of rambunctious comedic stuff that she is so well known for. So Can You Ever Forgive Me is based on real-life stuff. And in fact, it's based on a memoir by a woman named Lee Israel. And Lee Israel is the main character of the film. Lee Israel is the real-life character, but now I'm speaking about her as a character in the movie. She is a biographer. She writes biographies of famous people, and she's been on the New York Times bestseller list with one of her books, and she's written some other books, and now she is working on a biography of the old comedian Fanny Brice from back in earlier days from today. And her agent she says to her agent, I want a $10,000 advance. And the agent says, nobody's ever heard of Fanny Brice anymore. Nobody wants this book. I couldn't get you an advance of $10, says her agent. And Lee Israel is very upset by this and is working on this. It's a labor of love. She loves writing her biographies, but she's determined to press on with this one, even though it's not clear she's ever going to be able to get any money out of it. And she is living on very, very little money, and she can't afford to pay her bills. And now her cat is sick, and she can't afford to bring her cat to the veterinarian because she has an unpaid balance with the veterinarian. So one day when she is at the library in the middle of all these troubles, she discovers in a book about Fanny Brice, she discovers a letter that was written by Fanny Brice. And, well, that's a find, and it might be worth something. And so she goes to a dealer, and she manages to sell the letter. Not for very much, but she sells it for a little bit. And anyway, this starts her on a new sort of sub-Rosa career. She now starts forging letters from celebrities. She gets a hold of some old typewriters, and she types them out, and then she traces the signature of Noel Coward or Dorothy Parker or whoever it is, and goes to a dealer and sells it. In this way, she is able to make some money. She is able to get her cat treated, get the medications for her cat, and so forth. But, of course, this is totally 1,000% illegal, and it's a very risky business. In a way, it's a surprise to see this nice lady with this respectable literary career of writing biographies of famous people. It's a surprise to see her get involved in this criminal activity. Then again, maybe it's not a surprise, because we discover very early on in the film that Lee Israel has some character flaws. She's a hard drinker. She is not very nice to people. She is very impatient. She, as the cliche goes, does not suffer fools gladly. So in a way, you can see that she maybe does have the kind of shaky character which would allow her to get involved in an activity like this. In any event, she does get involved in it, and after a while, she kind of goes on lists. Dealers are not going to deal with her anymore because there start to be very powerful suspicions that some of this stuff, maybe all of this stuff that she is peddling, is bogus. But she has a friend, a person even more irresponsible than she is, a guy named Jack Hawk, a very flamboyant gay man played by Richard E. Grant in quite a wonderful performance. And she starts having him help her. He, by the way, is basically a dope dealer, but she has him sort of help out with her shady activities, and that is really what the thrust of the movie becomes. It becomes the two of them involved in supporting her career as a biographer of biographies nobody wants to read in a lot of cases, by going through this activity of literary forgery and dealing in these literary forgeries. And then eventually the whole thing comes to a mildly surprising conclusion. At the very end, we find out what happened to the real-life Lee Israel after all this was done. So the main reason to see this movie is two reasons. A, that it's a very involving story, a very quirky story about a real-life woman who got involved in some very shady stuff, and another one of these sort of good-natured criminal things, the lovable rogue, kind of like the Robert Redford movie that's out right now, The Man and the Gun. So it's very much a Lovell Rogue movie, but it's also very much a Melissa McCarthy movie, which we see her do a real dramatic role, probably for the first time. It has humorous aspects to it, but it's a real dramatic role, and she carries it off very, very well, and I'm very impressed with her. So Can You Ever Forgive Me is a movie that does not need to be forgiven. It's a good movie, and I had a good time watching it, and I'm sure many other people will as well. So that is my somewhat varied story this week, Joe.
Varied says it well. Thank you very much, David Sterritt. Films in Focus, the films The Hate You Give, A Bread Factory, Can You Ever Forgive Me?